Xenophobia. South Africans are in the news for the wrong reasons once again. Citizens there are attacking non-citizens over trade and economic issues. What are world leaders saying about this, and what can be done to stem the tide? Join us on this episode of News Connect on Citi TV as we find out. My name is Kojo Achman. Stay tuned.
Generally, in Africa, we have come a long way in terms of building on democracy. The age of the military regimes and junta is gone, and there is still room for improvement. There are still structural issues that we need to address, but like I said, it's a long journey. You have to keep moving. There are still issues that people use as an excuse to start extremism, to start violence. But I am sure that with the collaborative efforts of our sub-regional groups like the ECOWAS, the AU, and the United Nations, I think there is now a more integrated approach to addressing these issues, even on improving governance. What is happening in South Africa is unfortunate, and especially so when it is taking place in South Africa, a nation that has come a long way in terms of their efforts to being where they are, and also a nation that has received support from Africa and the world to ensure that South Africa has the kind of independence they are enjoying. I must commend President Ramaphosa for the stance he has taken. He has condemned the action, and I think we have to maybe drive down and to understand why this thing keeps recurring, who the actors are, what are they yearning for. And maybe the most I can say at this point is that this problem should be addressed by South Africans, by the South African government. But if there is any collaboration from the AU that could be sought, I'm sure that the AU is ready and willing to come in and provide support to the government of South Africa.
Solution would be what? We need to be neighborly. We need to be loving one another. We need to be fraternal. And these are attitudes or virtues that we cultivate and develop within our heart. And that ultimately will be the solution to any display of violence. When you recognize the other one as a brother like you, same nature, dignity, and everything like you, then when you want to do away with that life, you think twice. But when without this type of education and mental disposition, everything is like you treat things like objects that you can just dispense of. It's not true. Every human being has a dignity like you yourself. And if you recognize that, you'll think twice about hurting, abusing, killing, or anybody else.
Now let's bring it to the South African issue in that context. This is the third time such attacks or violent things have happened there.
We need a lot of education in South Africa. We need a lot of education. We can try to speak to South Africans. In 1971, when I got my first passport to travel to the United States, on the front page was stamped that I could not go to South Africa. So the pressure that was brought to bear on the international community or even South Africans to move away from apartheid the struggle was not fought only by South Africans. The fight against apartheid was a fight that was conducted by several outside South Africa. In fact, the collapse of apartheid was not due to political decision. It was due to economic reasons. South African business people recognize that it's in the interest of a lot of South African business community that apartheid collapse. So the doing away with apartheid was not because South Africans could demonstrate and show whatever type of that wasn't it.
It is more of a South African issue now. And I have made the position clear that we can give support when called upon. These are sovereign issues.
What will be the support you give when you're called upon?
Well, it depends on the nature of the call that we received. Well, we try to address the issues that will help build up the economy and open up the space for both nationals and foreigners to participate. We are expanding the African space. We have signed a free trade agreement, and it's about opening in Africa. We have to stay engaged. There is so much we still have to do in terms of increasing the volume of trade within Africa that we have not done. And these are the issues. Maybe the signing of this free trade agreement has taken the first step, and it's left with us. It is left with the African private sector to move in. And the issue of the private sector should not be left in the hands of the government. It is you and me and members of the private sector that should be bold, that should be come with initiative and open up the space for a better quality of life for everybody in Africa.
We appreciate the independence of South Africans, but this is not a trophy to be carried only by South Africans. The rest, we here in Ghana, we knew what Kwame Nkrumah did for the collapse of South Africa. I was in class 1, class 2. Every morning we used to pay pennies to support our brothers fighting in Congo and South Africa. So now when there's independence, you think there's just only South Africans. Fine, that's your country. There's a need for education. And I think that's the ultimate solution that we have. Government and police of South Africa, you only come when the fire has started. Okay, when somebody has ignited this kind of violence. And before the police gets there, shops would have been burned, people would have been killed, that's whatever. So what has to be done? We need to educate against South Africans. Speak to their heart. Help them to see the full dimensions of what it is. When you go to South Africa and Johannesburg, there's a museum. And that museum shows the very many heads of Africans there who also contribute to the thing there. You cannot have a museum that celebrates the very many of the African leaders who contributed to the victory of apartheid. You cannot appreciate that in a museum, and then when you come to town, when you see any other non-South African as an enemy, it doesn't work. So there's a need for serious education of South Africans. And this brings us to home, to where I come from. I've been in Soweto. I know the church in Soweto. Kali Church is there. There are a lot of Methodist churches. So probably tonight, hopefully I leave for my office in the Vatican, and from there we'll speak to the bishops and the priests in South Africa. It's as primitive as it's non-consequential and several whatever. So as I say from our side, we'll see what our priests and our bishops and all of them in South Africa can also gradually begin to speak to South Africans, help them recognize that the world at this point in time is more fraternal and more united than anything else. Okay, we need to consider the inclusiveness of all of this.
Globalization is the word, and it's time South Africans understand that the world is now a global village. That will be all for this episode of News Connect on Citi TV. My name is Kujo Achman. Keep watching Citi TV.